Is this the week the Missouri deep passing game finally clicks? And a prediction for the Vanderbilt game coming up on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, I want to talk about what I perceive to be the Bobby Knight style of coaching versus Eli Drinkwitz tactics coming up here on the program. First, though, now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started on that particular deal. And I actually do believe this is the week. If I had to bet anyway, no guarantees whatsoever. These deep passes, obviously, well, there is a bit of variability in that type of thing. And I think that's more or less what we're seeing right now. I don't think there's so much wrong with the Missouri deep passing game as well. We're just seeing the downside of variability right now. We're also 3 weeks into the season. You'll notice if you're an NFL fan right now, a lot of the offenses haven't been looking so hot. In particular, the passing games statistically have been poor so far, and there's just a lot of miscommunications to me that I see on Sundays between the receivers and the quarterbacks. And the reason that's relevant to college football in Missouri, to me, is because there is no preseason football and a much, much shorter and truncated version of training camp versus the NFL. So it shouldn't be a surprise if Missouri's passing game or Georgia's passing game, to take another example, maybe isn't totally firing on all cylinders yet. The good news is, if you're an optimist, I think the Missouri offense got better as the season went along last year, and I really think this is going to be the week that the Missouri passing game clicks because, number one, it's been pretty close to clicking to me the past 3 weeks anyway for the first part of the season. The margin of error there has been really, really slim. I think Missouri's been very close on several occasions to connecting on some of those passes. And just for some context here, last season, Brady Cook completed 46 of his passes thrown more than 20 yards down the field last season. Well, before the Boston College game, Cook was just 1 for 6. Tigers obviously missed all of their shots, I believe, that traveled more than 20 yards downfield in that game as well. So obviously, it's been a slow start for Cook in Missouri in that deep passing game. But against a Vanderbilt defense that, to me, didn't show a heck of a lot of resistance, especially in the back seven there, in the secondary, I just didn't see it. I just think Missouri is going to have not much problem at all throwing the football or running the football against Vanderbilt for that matter. And because of that, I'm thinking a 35-10 Missouri victory here. I really am. That's my prediction. I just don't think, as much as I respect Diego Pavia, I don't think there's a lot around him in terms of the skill position players for Vanderbilt. And on Pavia, by the way, Eli Drinkwitz said Pavia has stabilized the quarterback position. It helps that he's running the same offense since Vanderbilt has also hired New Mexico State's offensive coordinator. By the way, their former head coach is also with Vandy in an off-field role as well. And by the way, an anonymous viewer of the program says, how is it I've not seen it mentioned anywhere that we played against Pavia in 2022 when he was New Mexico State's quarterback? Well, anonymous, whoever you are, and from my experience, it's either Larry David or Ted Danson is anonymous. But regardless, that's a great call. And I think one of the reasons I personally forgot about this is, well, I missed that game. I think that's the only game I've missed. I was thinking back on this. Since I moved back to Columbia in 2009, I think I've missed one game, one Missouri home game in that period of time, and it was New Mexico State because I was lying on my couch just absolutely sick as a dog. That was not an entertaining football game. Really cold weather, possibly even rainy if I'm remembering. I was not going to be putting myself through that particular game. But unfortunately, Dino Pavia had to suffer through that particular game. And probably another reason a lot of Missouri fans don't really recall his game is it wasn't a very particularly memorable game. Passing-wise, Pavia was 6 of 17 against Missouri for 76 yards and an interception, although he did rush the ball 9 times for 50 yards, giving you an idea of the type of athlete that Pavia is. And watching him last week against Georgia Southern, or was it Georgia State? Regardless, one of those Georgia schools. I'm pretty sure it was Georgia State now that I think about it, Marcus Carroll's former school. But regardless, in the ball game last week, I was impressed with Pavia. I really was. And I think he's clearly improved as a player since 2022. He's probably got more around him than he did with New Mexico State in 2022. Obviously, he's got more talent around him with Vandy this season. I just don't see it being enough to get past what I think is a really, really good Missouri defense. Sure, they've had some coverage breaks, some mistakes early in this season. To me, I think the young free safety Marvin Burks probably learned a tough lesson last week against Boston College. I think a lot of young safeties tend to like to ball hawk and show what great instincts they have, come into the box, make a big play, that type of deal. Well, I think the lesson that Marvin Burks probably learned last week is if you're the last man back defensively, well, you got to be the last man back defensively. There is no cheating forward. You always have to keep the play in front of you in that spot. So no more cheating, Marvin Burks. Just keep it in front of you, play it conservatively, and let everybody else maybe make the instinctual plays. And since I was talking about the safety position, well, Joseph Charleston made a bit of history, I suppose, for Missouri as the first ever SEC-mandated injury report was out this week for Missouri. Appearing on it, Joseph Charleston, who left the Boston College game early with an undisclosed injury. I haven't heard a lot of information on Joseph other than he didn't practice on Tuesday, so that tells me that he really, really is questionable. If I had to bet, he probably won't play in this game. Tre'vez Johnson came in Charleston's stead there in the BC game. Also, Darius Smith and Sam Horn, both out for the season, were the only other Tigers mentioned on the injury report. So that's a good thing for Missouri. A lot more guys on 5 questionable players for Vanderbilt, obviously of varying importance, 4 guys out as well. So just in terms of injuries and depth, looks like Missouri already has what was an obvious edge in the depth chart, I would say, for Missouri. Just a much, much deeper team are the Tigers right now, despite the fact that Eli Drinkwitz did say that he thinks that this is Clark Lea's best team since he's been at Vanderbilt. But you know what? Let's not try to damn them too much with a faint praise there. Vanderbilt has not exactly been lighting the world on fire in the Clark Lee era. So this may well be Vanderbilt's best team in his era, but that's just not saying a whole lot. Again, I think Missouri cruises to a relatively easy 35-10 victory tomorrow. And one more note on the secondary while I'm on the topic. Talked a ton about Nic DeLoach in the offseason. He was splitting first-team reps with Toriano Pride for much of fall camp. But you know what? The actual splitting of reps with Pride hasn't been happening as much in the regular season so far. Though I will say DeLoach still seems like an important part of this team. He's definitely playing snaps, and for the most part, in obvious passing situations is where you're seeing DeLoach. He comes in and does actually take Toriano Pride's spot on the boundary on the outside of the defense, but Pride still stays on the field. He just then moves inside and plays that slot corner position in the dime package for Missouri. So while DeLoach hasn't been getting nearly as many snaps as Pride at this point, he's still an important part of this Missouri defense. Obviously, getting off the field on third downs, what's more important than that defensively? Not much. So DeLoach clearly an important piece as a redshirt freshman. And coming up on the program, while I think the Bobby Knight style of coaching has become antiquated in 2024, I think Eli Drinkwitz showed on Saturday that, well, it can still work in mild doses. So let's talk about that coming up here on the program in just a bit. But first, let's talk about FanDuel. You've heard me talk a ton about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, I got something different for you. Now, through Sunday, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. And I got to be honest, I usually like to go against the grain, but as I said on the SEC Squad show yesterday, I kind of like Tennessee on the road in Norman, Oklahoma against the Sooners. -6.5. Feels very much like a public pick to me, but I just can't resist. It just feels like the pick. We'll see what happens. Regardless if you're with me or not, you got to visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sports book. And Missouri fans, have you heard about ROY? It stands for Return on You, and it's a new platform that lets you, the fans, get involved in name, image, and likeness like never before by making contributions directly to your favorite athletes. By supporting players directly, you can help shape rosters, retain talent, and keep your favorite athletes out of the transfer portal. As you all know, NIL has changed the game for athletes. ROY changes the NIL game for fans. And fans' contributions are securely held and are only distributed if the athlete makes the decision that aligns with the fan's support. If not, the money is returned to the fan. ROY always allows fans to directly back their favorite college athletes. With ROY, fans can play a key role in shaping the future of their programs with name, image, and likeness potential. So download ROY for iOS or Android and enter referral code Locked On, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for additional details. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Support the players. Change the game with ROY. Now, in last week's Boston College game, Missouri had a, rather unusual 2nd and 59 situation after a couple of Luther Burden personal foul penalties that I called inexcusable, and there really was no excuse for either one of those penalties. I tried to be as fair as I could, and, I just didn't think there was any reason that either one of those plays should have happened. And indeed, in a 6-point ball game, those could have been huge moments for a Missouri team that has huge aspirations. But I got to say, long term, I wasn't particularly concerned about it because, number one, it sure seemed like Eli Drinkwitz kind of took care of it in the moment. And number two, I just sort of felt like that wasn't really something I've seen a lot from Luther Burden. Seemed like an out-of-character moment for him now in Season 3 here at Missouri. Well, just on some of that and on everything else as far as Missouri's mistakes the first 3 weeks, Drinkwitz had a fairly interesting quote. He said, "Yesterday I challenged our staff and our players to put your feelings in a box. Don't come into this room and thinking we're going to celebrate and party based off the film, because that's not going to be it. We're going to challenge each other in here because the lack of discipline is a result of the lack of accountability, and there's going to be accountability. No different than they caught me on tape getting on Luther between the third and fourth quarter. He deserved every bit of that, and he understood it. I mean, he looked me right in the eye and said, 'Yes, sir.' Just like yesterday when we addressed it, he understood that selfish penalties cannot happen. The team's mission is way more important than anybody's individual hurt feelings. So put your feelings in a box, put your big boy pants on, take accountability for the things that we have to improve on." So, first of all, obviously I think everyone has been patting this Missouri team on the back all off season. So for the fact that I think Eli Drinkwitz is almost in the perfect spot here in a way as a coach, where he can constantly push and motivate his team forward to push for perfection while still being undefeated. Fortunately, the Tigers, again, we're 3-0. A win is a win, folks. Of course, we would have loved to have beaten Boston College 35-0 last week. That would have been fantastic. But again, if you can win, if you can improve, learn about yourself while winning, I mean, that's the perfect scenario right there. And really, more to the point, there's this, I think years ago when I was a kid growing up, there was sort of the Bobby Knight strategy of coaching was pervasive in not only basketball, but of course in football, even baseball as well. And of course, Bobby Knight was called the General. And when Bobby Knight was born in 1940, well, what was happening then? World War II, of course. America wins the war in 45, of course. General Patton, for example, is thought of as one of the great American heroes of all time after that. And so everybody from that generation, from Bobby Knight's generation, especially a guy who ultimately ended up coaching at West Point, the Army Academy, well, a lot of reverence for that kind of stuff. So the idea is, hey, let's basically be militaristic in terms of our coaching and our treatment of players and that type of thing. I'm guessing General Patton didn't put his arm around you and give you a lot of attaboys on the battlefield, but the guy was effective for what he was doing. You got to give him that. And you got to give that to Bobby Knight as well. And my point in laying all of this out is obviously times change, generations change, but there are still moments where you got to be Bobby Knight, where you got to be the General, General Patton, General Eli Drinkwitz on occasion. Because Drinkwitz, yeah, he's a much more laid-back guy than Bobby Knight. He wears the cool Jordan sneakers and all that kind of stuff. He looks like kind of a dork, as he's admitted to himself and to all of us. But to me, when you don't just stomp around and yell and scream all the time, actually, when you have a moment that requires a little bit of yelling and screaming, well, it actually is taken seriously. Again, as I said in my previous episode, one previous segment here this week, I doubt that Eli Drinkwitz spends a ton of time castigating Luther Burden like that, especially in front of the team. So when it happens, when it is necessary, it has the impact I think that you want, instead of, oh, look, Dad's screaming again, that type of thing. Eventually, you just tune that stuff out, in my opinion. Now, obviously, Bobby Knight was an incredibly successful basketball coach, but the last, 10, 15, 20 years of his career were not nearly as successful as the first half. So there is that as well. My only reason of bringing this up is I think I have a lot of older listeners, a lot of younger listeners too, and everything in between. But I think the older generation sometimes leans still more toward the Bobby Knight side of things. And again, I understand that when you're disappointed in something, in a player, a play, anything, you want them to fix it. And that's kind of what coaching comes down to. It's not just about X's and O's, obviously. Such a huge element of coaching is motivation. You're constantly trying to get your players to do something that is basically impossible, which is giving 100% effort at all times. There's basically no human being other than maybe, Michael Jordan or just the craziest, psychopath competitors of all time. Maybe they have that, but 99% of us mere mortals, I certainly don't have that type of work ethic. I'll promise you that. But coaches are always trying to push you and get the most out of you they possibly can. So the question is, it's not so much what's the right way to do it, it's how do you do it most effectively. Sometimes you need to yell at a guy, and sometimes there are guys who, you don't want to hurt their feet. They're a little sensitive, that type of deal. Maybe they do need a pat on the back, an arm around the shoulder, that type of deal. And by the way, sometimes that same person also needs a kick in the butt occasionally, just like I think Luther Burden did on Saturday. So to me, while those were inexcusable penalties by Burden, I really think that was a learning moment, a teachable moment, and to me it seemed like message received from all accounts. And the Desiree Reed-Francois saga, as far as her buyout with Missouri, is officially over, and probably good news on both sides, to be quite honest. So let's talk about that here in just a little bit. But first, game time. Yes, this time of year, I love going to live events, concerts, but especially Major League Baseball and football as well. Well, Game Time has a new feature to get you the best possible tickets. It's called Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff to show you only the best deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of different seat options. And if you want to see the Kansas City Royals, well, this is your final chance of the regular season, Friday through Sunday against those dastardly San Francisco Giants. That's right, I haven't forgotten about you yet, Madison Bumgarner. I'm still upset, even though it's been 10 years now at this point. But again, if you want to see the Royals, the Cardinals, concerts, of course, MLS action, football is happening, of course. You want to get Missouri-Vanderbilt tickets at the last minute, you got to check out Game Time and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So a few months ago, when Desiree Reed-Francois surprisingly left Missouri for Arizona, well, the terms of her contract called for a $3 million payout to the university. Well, Arizona, her current employer, ended up paying half of that amount, $1.5 million. But she was going to be on the hook for the other $1.5 million. So what ends up happening here, I thought, really, from Missouri's perspective, I initially said, why would Missouri pay her anything? Why would they let her off of the hook? But the reality is, well, she used some leverage here, I would say. She's a smart person she at least left this out there long enough that was, threatening some type of legal action, which, ultimately the settlement here, Missouri settled for $2 million, long story short. So that means that Desiree Reed-Francois is going to owe $500,000 instead of $1.5 million out of her pocket. So basically, just by kind of threatening to do a lawsuit, she saved herself $1 million. Smart move. I got to give her that. I think if I had that option, I would probably do the exact same thing. I got to be honest with you. So a good day for Desiree Reed-Francois in that regard, and probably a good day for Missouri just in terms of, seems like a relatively fair settlement in reality when you consider the cost of litigation and just the hassle of litigation, period. Why even go through this? The fact that the two parties could come to an agreement here, probably a good thing for both sides. And while there's been a decent amount of talk about the rule changes in college football this season, from the 2-minute warning to the clock not stopping when the chains move outside of the final 2 minutes of each half, plus the communication in the helmet with the quarterback and the designated player on defense as well. But to me, the biggest change of all this season is that there are 2 bye weeks. Yes, Missouri, of course, had 1 bye week last season, just like the rest of college football for the most part. But everyone this season has 2 bye weeks, as far as I can tell, certainly in the Southeastern Conference. And I think this is a good move. I really do. Even without a new expanded 12-team playoff, I think 2 bye weeks is a good move. But especially with it, if you're going to lengthen the season, I think not only just in terms of protecting players from injury and overuse and all that good stuff, just in terms of actual entertainment value, obviously I think you'll have better football with more rested players, but also just actually lengthening out the season slightly. College football comes and goes so quickly. I don't mind lengthening out the season a little bit. Frankly, I'm stunned that the NFL hasn't done that too. That seems like an obvious and easy concession, but I bet we'll with the players union and the league, I'm saying, seems like an easy concession for the league to make to the players union at some point when inevitably we're going to move to 18 games, I would say. We've already gone from 16 to 17. Seems like the nice round number of 18 is almost a total inevitability. So if you're the league, why not give another bye week? By the way, that makes the season then 20 weeks long. Don't your television partners like that? Don't you, the league, like that? I'm just saying. I'd rather do that than have games on Friday night in Brazil to start the season. And thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Football. If you like this format, you're going to absolutely love Locked On College Football. Get the national perspective on everything in this big, beautiful sport. Find Locked On College Football on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts as well. I'll see you all probably on Sunday morning for your Vanderbilt recap. I'll see you then right here on Locked On Mizzou.